Let's go. You lead the way. Where are we headed? Towards a net zero future, of course. Cleaner water, more electricity, a sustainable society. That's the destination we've set ourselves. This we know. Yes, we know exactly where we're going, but we need to get there quicker. So, let's build on the progress we've already made by working and walking together. With the right partners, tools and ideas, we'll become an unstoppable force. This we know. Right now, there are businesses who are putting technology and sustainability at the heart of everything they do. Brave leaders turning maybes into realities and building something better for everyone. Now is the time to look to the future and reinvent ourselves today, empowering others to do the same tomorrow. Yes, we know what the future holds, and we know how to get there. So, let's take charge of the journey today.
Hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Joining us at the start of week 2 here from Glasgow, a vital event in COP26. Today is a joint session, I'm proud to say, with the GPST and Accenture, talking for me about what is the most pivotal area in the decarbonisation of our energy networks. It's going to be an interesting session with various panel discussions and people joining us from around the world. And to help set the frame for this vital topic, Fintan Sly, Chief Executive of National Grid ESO, will introduce what we're going to cover. Fintan, over to you.
Super. Thanks, Simon. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Fintan Sly. I am the Executive Director of the Electricity System Operator and also chair the System Operator CEO Steering Group at GPST. First of all, just wanted to thank Accenture for hosting this event here today. I think it's really, really timely to have this discussion. And I also wanted to thank Simon and his team for all the help they've given to GPST over the last 6 months as we've looked at how do we bring GPST from an initial idea to an organisation of a global scale that can deliver real impact in terms of decarbonisation. So Simon, Carly and all of the team, thank you. Really, really appreciate that. So why are we here? Well, it's about climate change. It's about addressing climate change. We know it's real, we know it's imminent, and we know that the impacts of it are catastrophic. And therefore we need to act, and we need to act at pace and with urgency if we're going to address that and keep global temperature rises at or below 1.5 degrees Celsius. To borrow and change slightly a phrase from an influential teenager, we need to move from blah, blah, blah to do, do, do. This needs to be a decade where we move to action and to implementation. And we know that in addressing net zero, decarbonisation of power systems is an absolutely essential part of that. As many of you know, in the UK, the Electricity System Operator is transforming the grid so that it can operate at zero carbon for periods of time by 2025. So by 2025, the UK will have a grid that, when the conditions allow, it can operate at zero carbon. And the UK government has further committed the UK to deliver 100% zero carbon electricity by 2035. And that is a huge challenge. The scale of what's needed is absolutely enormous. And we're going to need technological innovations, we're going to need new approaches, we're going to need new business models, new markets even, if we're going to deliver on that. And we also need to do that at a global scale. So if this is going to work, and we are going to hit net zero, as a world and as a planet, we need to collaborate globally if we are going to address climate change. And that's why GPST is a really good example of that global collaboration. It brings together system operators from around the world who are at the forefront of addressing the issues associated with really high levels of renewables on their systems. And you're going to hear from some of them today. We have Thomas from EnergyNet. You'll hear from Daniel in a minute from AMO. But also in the consortium, we have EirGrid from Ireland. We have CalISO and ERCOT from the US. And GPST brings together those system operators with some of the leading research institutions around the world. And the idea is twofold. With the system operators and those research institutions, can we focus global research on those core engineering issues that will enable us to push even further and even faster that decarbonisation and that integration of renewables onto our systems? So that's one part of it. At the forefront of knowledge and technology, can we push those boundaries even further? The second part of it is, can we then leverage that experience that exists in those system operators and those research institutions to accelerate the decarbonisation of other grids globally who are at a much earlier stage in their decarbonisation journey, and enable them to leapfrog some of those technical challenges and technical barriers? And through those two things, GPST aims to make a dramatic acceleration of the decarbonisation of electricity grids globally. And I think if we're going to address climate change, that's absolutely what we need to do. We need to be looking at a dramatic acceleration. We need to be looking for new technology, new ways of working. And so that's why this event is really, really timely. That's why the range of people that we have speaking here is so appropriate. So I'm really, really looking forward to the discussion and the debate. I think it's really, really timely, and hopefully coming out of it, what we'll have is a perspective on what are those new technologies, how do we push the boundaries even further, and how do we collaborate to a much greater extent to achieve that acceleration in the decarbonisation of power systems globally. So very much looking forward to the rest of the discussion. I'm going to hand you over to Simon, who's going to introduce our first speaker. Simon.
Thank you, Fintan. In that explanation, I hope you've got how truly special GPST is and its intent. This level of collaboration actually is not occurring in anywhere near enough industries, and these leaders are stepping up to achieve change at the forefront of our agenda. And to exemplify that, we've got Daniel Westerman. He's the CEO of AMO. Daniel, I believe you're joining us from Melbourne, I think. Thank you so much. It looks dark already out there, so it's probably getting close to 11:30 or 12 gone, I don't quite know. So really appreciate you joining us. You'll be pleased to know I looked at your website. You say that you're about keeping the lights on and the water hot throughout Australia. But I know you're playing a pivotal role in GPST. So I'd love to hear your thoughts around the agenda and how important GPST is for your success out there in Australia. Over to you, Daniel.
Thanks, Simon, and it really is a pleasure to be with you virtually. Yes, it is getting a little dark here in Australia, but I hear it's not raining quite as hard, so at least that's a start. But here in Australia, look, the energy transition that Fintan's just described is happening at record pace. And I shared some highlights at an event last week alongside my colleagues from California, from Ireland and others. And the consistency of themes and challenges is quite remarkable, really. And that's why I'm really delighted to be here to introduce the Global Power System Transformation Consortium, or the GPST. Could we go to the next slide, please? So let me start with those challenges. I mean, globally, power systems are transforming before our very eyes. We're experiencing the biggest change to the way that power is both generated and consumed since Thomas Edison first connected his power station to the market. And it is both exciting and daunting at the same time. Decarbonising our power grids is a fundamental building block of a net zero economy. It's an enabler. But as well as decarbonising, we're also decentralising, we're digitising, and frankly, we're democratising. And the trends that we are experiencing right now, they're not only just happening now, but they're set to accelerate. And that is the deployment of renewables, the electrification of transport and heat. It's the integration of decentralised resources into the electricity grid. So let me just bring that to life a bit in the Australian context. Over the past decade, 9 in every $10 invested in power generation in Australia has been in renewables. On a per capita basis, we're actually installing renewables at the fastest pace in the world, 10 times the world average, and double that of the next fastest country, Germany. And it's pretty sunny here in Australia, so distributed energy in the form of rooftop solar is just going gangbusters. In fact, rooftop solar already represents a quarter of our overall generation capacity in the grid. And there are times when power from that rooftop solar displaces other generation to be our dominant source. In fact, in South Australia last weekend, power from rooftop solar was able to meet 87% of underlying demand. And power flowed in reverse, backwards, from consumers up into the transmission system for 4 hours straight. It is pretty amazing stuff, really. And we as system operators are right at the heart of this transition. It's our core role to manage the operational challenges of today to ensure society continues to have safe, reliable and affordable energy, that the lights stay on. And it's our role to plan and lead the energy transition, if you like, so that we can navigate these challenges in the best interests of consumers. And the challenges really are significant. We're talking about a power system with fundamentally different characteristics. It's generated in different locations from where coal and gas were available to where the sunshine and the wind are abundant. We've gone from big spinning bits of metal which provide inherent inertia and strength into the system to waveforms being created by electronic inverters, and from controllable dispatchable generation giving way to generators and energy that comes from the sun and the wind, which inherently vary with the weather. And as system operators, this is just an unprecedented change in the way that we manage our grids. Can we go to the next slide, please? And with such a huge amount of change, we need to take urgent and coordinated action. And the GPST is a platform for us to act together. It's to coordinate and to share knowledge between power system operators around the world. The AEMO, the Australian Energy Market Operator, together with 5 of our peer system operators, all from geographies that Fintan mentioned, are all at the forefront of this energy transition, have come together to create this consortium. So AEMO from Australia, EirGrid from Ireland, Energinet from Denmark, ERCOT from Texas, the California ISO, and of course the UK's National Grid ESO. And we've come together to ensure that the technical and engineering knowledge is being developed and shared at the pace and scale that's needed to support this global energy transition. And of course, we can't do that alone. And we're really proud to have some of the world's preeminent research institutions as our partners in the journey, such as NREL, ESIG, the CSIRO, and more. Next slide, please. And the objective is really for the GPST to act as a kind of force multiplier in this global effort to drive a rapid transition to a zero carbon electricity grid. By connecting partners in this ecosystem and creating intentional, inclusive and purpose-driven collaboration, will be in the best interest to solve the difficult challenges that are common to all of us. And we'll do this by bringing together system operators, governments, donors, research institutions, and other private sector players. And the GPST will connect those facing the operating challenges with those working at the forefront of research and development, pushing the technical frontier of what is possible. So we're structuring this into 5 pillars of action. The first, research and learning, so developing new technical solutions to the challenges of today and tomorrow. The second being technical support to help scale out best practice engineering and operational solutions for developing country system operators. The third being localized technology adaptation, so to help adapt technology to individual country contexts. Workforce development is the next one, to help build the inclusive and diverse workforce of tomorrow. And lastly, around open data and tools to support the real-time operations and planning. And look, we're just at the start of this journey, but we've already had some really great successes. For example, at AEMO, we are quite well advanced in the development of a near real-time simulator for Australia's largest transmission system. And this digital twin includes a digital representation of around 500 transmission connected generators and storage systems running their actual control systems. This is a world first, together with 2,000 load points and 25,000 transmission components. That first module will be operational in the first half of next year and will include an open access module for companies wanting to test and tune their power system models to connect new generation into the network. And so digital twins are an area that have attracted a lot of interest and collaboration across the GPST. And I'm quite positive that this will continue to be the case and that this is just one of very many success stories for the GPST to come. So please join us now to enable the rapid transformation of power systems and the path to net zero and making that a reality. Thank you, Simon.
Climate change and the transition to clean energy present each of us with new possibilities. The best way to embrace these opportunities is to work together, because there's power in partnership. The Global Power System Transformation Consortium, or GPST, is a collective of private and public partners committed to accelerating the transition to low-emission, low-cost, secure, reliable power systems. We act as a force multiplier in the global effort to drive the rapid transition to a zero-carbon electricity grid, equipping system operators with the technology, insight, and support they need to find innovative solutions to common challenges and to realize new opportunities.
A small group of CEOs from around the world came together to discuss and explore how to address the unprecedented technical and operational challenges we were facing in integrating large amounts of renewable energy onto our systems. And further, as CEOs of electricity system operators who are at the forefront of this transition, we felt we had an opportunity to make a difference. And so the Global Power System Transformation Initiative was born.
Together we can find answers to tomorrow's questions. Starting today.
Daniel, if you're still listening, thank you very much, but we really will forgive you if it's now time to go to bed down there in Melbourne. At Accenture, we believe the future and some of these challenges we're all going to tackle are going to be determined by a combination of the brilliance of human ingenuity and technology coming together to solve the world's problems. So now I'm delighted that Mark Borrett from Reactive Technologies is going to stand up and talk to you about a case study which is at the front end of solving some of the problems, particularly its challenge of managing supply. So with that, Mark, over to yourself. We'll look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Simon, again. And I'm very honoured to share this platform with Accenture and the GPST Consortium. This is also a very proud moment to be able to present our inertia measurement system that we've pioneered with our amazing partner, National Grid ESO in the UK. This is a genuine technological breakthrough in the progress to achieving net zero. It represents the culmination of many years of innovation and effort pioneered by my late co-founder, Dr. Heikki Huomo, and continued by our exceptionally talented engineering teams to get us to this point today. If I click on. So this image sums up the challenge that every grid operator faces. Running a power system solely from renewable sources is stepping into the unknown and is, I believe, one of the biggest technical challenges we've ever faced. It's also fundamental to the entire net zero transition. And the power system is the eye of the needle through all the huge decarbonisation strands have to pass: heating, transport, manufacturing, as well as renewable energy. And it's individuals like Fintan, like Daniel, like Thomas and Cesar, who you'll hear from later, and other leaders of power grids and their professional teams who have this very real challenge of delivering net zero whilst keeping the lights on and having a secure power system. Net zero is as hard as it is ambitious, and there is a long way to go. In this image, the figure is the grid operator who constantly has to balance the power system to keep it stable whilst stepping into the unknown as they go towards net zero. The challenge being that as you go towards net zero, the rope gets thinner and increasingly less stable. On sunny and windy days, when more energy is produced by renewable assets on the power system itself has little of the stabilising contributions from large fossil generators, and so this balancing act becomes more and more difficult to achieve. And in the absence of real-time, accurate measurement data of the stability of the power system, the grid operators are exposed to greater risk and also operational cost, which can obviously act as a brake on net zero transition. However, a key part of overcoming this challenge is measuring the power system in a real-time way. And so with our grid metric system that I will explain in a second, this allows grid operators to always know the operational limits of their power system, to maximise the use of renewable energy, and to ensure a cleaner, greener power system can be achieved more safely, faster and cheaper than has been possible up to now. In effect, what we've created is a sonar system for a power grid. We send a power wave from a modulator into the entire power system. And then we measure the physical effect that that power wave has on the power system, which gives us a true and genuine measurement of its physical stability. And because we're doing this right at the grid edge, we take into account all of the stability sources across the entire power system. And we can provide a unique, real-time, continuous direct measurement of stability that enables a grid operator's control team to trust the data and effectively use this to allow more and more renewable energy sources to be absorbed by the system safely. This represents a major breakthrough for power systems and zero adoption globally, and is a true first-of-a-kind technology. And this is it. This is the world's largest continuously operating ultracapacitor. It's got 8 tons of ultracapacitor cells. It's located in Teesside in the UK, and we've developed it for National Grid ESO. The UK, being an island, has meant that National Grid has seen many of these net zero challenges happening more early for them than other grid operators around the world. And Teesside has got the world's largest wind farm located on it. So it's highly fitting that we've based our inertia measurement system here in the UK. And this unique measurement data that the system will produce will help National Grid manage the unknown and better navigate the path to net zero for the UK grid. So we firmly believe that this approach unlocks a great opportunity for power grid operators. It allows a chance for greater renewable energy adoption on a much more, safer basis. Inertia has historically been associated with large synchronous fossil generators that are connected into the transmission grid of a power network. However, this is not the full picture. In fact, there is a long tail of inertia hidden in the distribution grid. There are many hundreds of thousands of pumps, motors, conveyor belts and other synchronous machines that exist, but they're deep in the distribution grid, and they are invisible effectively to the system operator. But all of them provide a contribution effect of inertia. What we can do is we can unlock that additional capacity. Academic studies and our own data indicate that the distribution system can offer somewhere between 10 to 30% of additional inertia capacity that can be factored into power grid operators' stability assessments to enable the greater use of renewable energy to be used. Therefore, without the ability to measure in accurate form the total measurement system, you restrict yourself by just measuring the transmission system to a much smaller amount of inertia and effectively inhibiting net zero. And so the opportunity this technology presents is to bring the distribution capacity into the control room for the grid operator to use to speed the renewable energy transition. So stepping back and looking ahead, as we've heard from Fintan and from Daniel, we have this huge shared net zero challenge that requires new technologies, new tools, new skills, new systems, new ways of working and operating, and new ways of financing. And it requires us to also be bold together. And I'm sure that GPST's support for new technologies and sharing the best practices with other grid operators will be an important enabler as part of a safer, faster net zero transition. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. A perfect case study to help us understand the power of data and technology with human smarts. To see it live and existing, it's not blah, blah, it's talk, it's action, and it's happening. And the sort of savings of 10 to 30% start to show what data and tech can do. For those out there who really don't understand the significance and complexity of what this team and this consortium is trying to get their mind around, let me try and explain the variability of what's going on. We're dealing with a world where the supply side of what this group of businesses deal with is changing dramatically in terms of the advent and supply of renewables, which can themselves be variable in terms of what they supply. At the same time, everything we see in our consumer world and business world is going to change the demand side generation, and the shift and the requirement to electricity is going to go up significantly. And in the middle of that, there is a set of cables, wires, battery capability, which is based on a historic system of supply and demand. And these group of businesses sit above that, seeking to manage those flows. It's been described as they're the brains that sit above that flow. The biggest transition that we're going to cope with as we seek to get to 50 is going to be that in terms of our energy supply and its ongoing demand. The ability for these businesses to cope with that change is at the forefront of the success that we're going to go through. And just to give you a sense of some of the numbers, it's viewed that there's going to be around $14 trillion is going to be required by 2050 into the generation of supply. But for every dollar that goes into the generation, there's another dollar required into the grid. That currently there is about 20% of the spend we estimate within these networks associated with digitization, but it's going to need to go to over 40%. And at the same time, each and every day, and we've seen it, there's pressure around maintaining security of supply, pricing to not move, and the variability and thoughts around coal and gas at the same time. It's quite humbling as a provider of services to get mind around the enormity of the task that this group of businesses is taking on. And with that, we're now going to have a panel to discuss some of those challenges further. We will be joined by two key folk remotely. But first, I'm going to introduce some folks up onto the panel. First, I'd like to invite Thomas Eggebø from EnergyNet from Denmark, Chief Executive. Please join me up here, Thomas. Thank you. Katie Hareza from EPRA is going to join. She's the VP of Corporate Affairs. And I'm also going to invite Fintan back up onto the stage, please, Fintan, if you could come and join us. I'll stay at the end here. And then I'll introduce our colleagues remotely. Thank you for joining us when we come to you both, César and Louise. So thank you for joining us. Just to get things going and maybe change gears a little bit, Katie, I'm going to come to you first, if I can. And last week, and where we've got to so far at COP, what do you think? What's been a highlight?
A highlight for me has been this is my first time at COP. So I guess from a newbie perspective, it's just the energy and the commitments that have already been made by several different companies, the commitments to move away from coal and the commitments to set more ambitious targets that were ever set before. So I'd say those were some of the highlights for me. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thomas?
Well, yes, I was not here actually last week, but I did speak to some of the negotiators.
Right.
And one interesting thing they actually said was that just meeting physically seems to sort of add a kind of positive tone to their talks. So I think that's a good thing to notice. But otherwise, I would say, I mean, there have been some important announcements on methane, forests, et cetera, but I still think there is quite a long way to go to make sure that we end up with a result that will allow us basically to be within hope of delivering on the Paris promises.
Yeah. Vinto, I know you were up.
Yeah, so, I mean, I shared the sentiment that was expressed. I mean, I think that there has been some really good progress, and that has, given it, I think, some momentum around methane forests, and that is, as you mentioned. And some of the narrative coming back, sort of the public narrative coming out of the negotiations, does seem to be positive, whether that's driven by people sort of meeting in person or sort of, actually getting forward. So I'm pretty optimistic that it won't fail. But I'm a bit more guarded as to whether it'll be the success that we need it to be. There does seem to be momentum there to get to some sort of outcome that will move us forward, but whether it is of a scale commensurate with the challenge, I think, is still in the balance, I think.
Yeah, it's this feeling of we wanted it to do more, but it's done something. Louise, I know you're remote, but you were here last week as part of even a session that we had here. Louise Anderson from the World Economic Forum Energy Group. Louise, what did you feel last week while you were here?
So my first COP, fairly overwhelming, but rather than going into some shameless self-promotion, which is kind of tempting because we did launch something with EPRI, but one thing I wanted to share actually, which I thought was interesting when I was looking at this panel, was that on Tuesday, we saw the launch of India's ambitious program called the Green Grids Initiative as part of their One Sun, One World, One Grid. And it's very similar to what was announced by China a couple of years ago on the Global Energy Interconnection System. But it's basically thinking about how to combine a massive increase in solar and wind power with international grids on every continent. So when I was thinking about this session, and one thing that stood out for me, that really kind of hit home, this idea that grids and the importance of grids are becoming more understood when we talk about trying to integrate massive volumes of solar and wind onto our systems.
Thank you for that, Louise. My reflections are you always find that your toughest taskmasters are your family in life, and when you have to explain. So my explanation, which I used on a panel, was I'm not sure that we're going to keep 1.5 alive, but I do think we might have 5 alive, right, to keep us going. And my 5 were, I thought, deforestation and methane. Having spent a lot of time with financial institutions, I think Mark Carney's financial, whether it's 130 trillion or it's half that, the scale of financial movements was significant. I think, for yourself, the benefit of the IFRS standards, changing the nature of standards will be a big deal. And the final one from UKI and his perspective in the UK was Rishi Sunak's view that by 23, every company in the UK is going to have to show its transition plan. And that's a game changer if you're actually listed in the UK and need to move. And hopefully that'll move the UK to be at the front of some of this transition. So with some of that framing, I think I'm not going to do a football metaphor like Boris, but it feels like it's maybe still all to play for, but somewhere to go. We're honoured to have César Bertrand on the video here, and César is chief executive of Peru's systems operator, COES. So, César, thank you for joining us from Peru. It's early in the day, I know, for you over there. I'm keen to hear from you, the role that you're playing in Peru's decarbonisation, and how GPST is helping you. Cesar, over to you.
Thank you, Simon. Very happy to be here. First of all, I would like to comment about the highlights of the COP26. For us, it was very interesting that there was an emphasis on land use and deforestation. I know it's not related with the power system, but it's very important because for a country like us, that the greenhouse effect gases that the whole power system emits are only 9% of the whole picture. And deforestation is the biggest producer in the use of illegal mining. So it's very important for us that this was very highlighted this time. And regarding your question, as the system operator, as the power system operator, we think that we have two kinds of roles. The first one would be to advise the authorities, the Ministry of Energy and Mines in Peru, of what's coming next in the system, not only in terms of the need of new capacity installed, new transmission lines, but also the needs of new regulation that would enable us to manage a system with a lot of renewables. In this case, the special one is the develop of the market of ancillary systems, because without that, we cannot operate the system. And the other role is to get ready as the system operator. Right now, our system is fairly clean. It's most half and half natural gas and hydro, and only 5% of renewables. And we don't have coal at all. Last coal plant is going to be decommissioned next year. And but we know that the future is in renewables. So the other role for GOES is to get ready, to prepare, to learn everything that everybody is doing around the world to get ready when renewables are an important part of the energy matrix in Peru.
Thank you very much, Cesar. And I really appreciate you joining us, and hopefully we'll see you at the next COP.
Yes, of course, with pleasure.
Louise, I'm going to come to you now. You're with the World Economic Forum, and you sit and look at the electricity sector in its entirety and have the advantage of looking across. Could you give us your thoughts as you sit there from the WEF, and what do you think the ESOs and the operators need to do as their priorities for the next 3 to 5 years or so?
Sure. And thanks for the question. So we've been working on the World Economic Forum in collaboration with what we call our strategy officer community. So that's strategy officers from some of the largest electricity companies around the world. We've been looking at grids recently. And the reason we've been looking at grids is because back in July, a group of CEOs from across the industrial, the automotive and the energy sector sent an open letter to the European Commission, basically calling for more renewables, but also more grids, or the relief of grid bottlenecks across the system in order to support and to accelerate industrial electrification. So we said, okay, that's quite interesting. And again, it goes back to, kind of for the first time, this understanding that if we're talking about electrification, clean electrification, it's not just about renewables, it's also about grids. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the initial findings, which is kind of some opportunities and maybe one challenge for these grid operators. And if I start with Japan, so if you look at Japan, 2 separate frequency zones, 50 hertz and 60 hertz, and 10 TSOs, it can be super complex to transfer electricity between regions in Japan. And then in 2020, the government of Japan announced its plan to install about 45 gigawatts of offshore wind in the country by 2040. Now, in order to enable that, they have a plan to install a significant amount of transmission lines. But interestingly, most of these transmission lines will actually be subsea grids or bootstraps along the coast of Japan. And they're going to do that in order to enable the integration of the offshore wind that they're planning to build. Now, in parallel, UK, and I'll come back to why these two are both, I kind of group them together. The UK is going to employ 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. And currently they take a project-by-project approach to this kind of offshore wind build-out. However, they believe, and according to National Grid's ESO, and in fact Finton's team, they believe that that's going to become quickly unsustainable. And what they want to do is adopt an integrated approach for offshore projects to be delivered from 2025. And they're saying that this could save consumers approximately £6 billion, as well as optimizing the amount of new electricity infrastructure assets which need to be built out. And again, this is a really good example of the benefit of taking a holistic, optimized and integrated approach. So Japan and UK, the opportunity there is to take that integrated approach to the integration of these variable renewable sources. Now, the next two are the US and the EU. So looking at the US, currently the US grid is split into three separate regions. So you have the Western interconnection, the Eastern interconnection, and you have Texas. Now, current policies on things like cost recovery and permitting actually don't incentivize the build out of cross-border transmission lines across the country. But where the opportunity lies there is actually to accelerate renewables integration, improve balancing and reliability, while at the same time as dealing with some of those congestion issues. What you need is this planned and integrated nationwide transmission grid, which could be advanced in the US. Now, the EU, to switch on to a different region, the EU actually already has requirements for each country to have 10% of the power produced interconnected or shared with neighbouring countries. However, the EU can still go further. So if you take Germany, for example, where the renewable supply is in the north and the load centres are in the south. So the grid becomes congested as lines reach their max carrying capacity. And so again, the use of interconnectors in this situation, such as the NordLink, allows Germany to connect its variable renewables to Norway's hydropower facilities. And that allows to counteract some of the bottlenecks in Germany's transmission system. Of course, not all the bottlenecks, but it goes a good way. So the point, or the opportunity for the EU and the US is to continue with this state, country and regional interconnection in order to accelerate the integration of renewables across their regions. And then I wanted to finish with Australia. So Australia is much more of a challenge, but it's a challenge faced by most countries. The example is an almost 200-kilometre high voltage AC overhead line into Melbourne was identified by AEMO as the most economically efficient investment option to increase the amount of electricity that can be transported into Melbourne. The project is facing public opposition with calls for undergrounding, use of different technologies and rerouting. This is very similar to the challenges most countries are suffering at this moment in time. Most of these large transmission projects take 10 years and over to deliver. Australia has put in place comprehensive planning processes. They've also, done significant community outreach and engagement, but nonetheless, it's still taking a lot of time to build these. And even some countries around the world are actually discussing compulsory land acquisitions at this point in order to overcome these issues. So again, this is more of a challenge than an opportunity. However, maybe now that industry is understanding the need, the momentum from that kind of industrial understanding can be leveraged to help with some of that even political opposition to these lines. So to recap very quickly, the opportunities that I see that can be leveraged is the increased interconnection between neighbouring states, countries and regions. And, the EU has already done a lot in that space, and the US can really take advantage of those interconnections between the states. And, back again to Mr. Modi's GGI, or Global Grid Initiative, these grid investments are no regret investment decisions as we try and bring more variable renewables onto the system. Number two, and this is coming back to Japan and UK, this is the optimized integrated approach to the build out of renewables, saving money for consumers while at the same time optimizing infrastructure requirements for build out. And then finally, the Australia example, or in fact, all of our countries' examples, the challenge. NIMBY, so not in my backyard, public and political acceptance remain the biggest challenges for grid development. And those comprehensive planning processes and community engagement and stakeholder outreach remain key. And then maybe we can also leverage that momentum coming from the industrial understanding that to move towards clean electrification, we will need grids.
Louise, thank you for a whistle-stop tour around the world and a dissection of the challenge and the clear benefits of integrated thinking, as you say, but also some of the challenges that all of the businesses here are facing. With that in mind, Thomas, I'm going to come to you. EnergyNet's been at the forefront of this. I'm interested in hearing how you've got on and also how you've benefited from GPST.
Yes. Thanks a lot for that question, and also thanks a lot for inviting me for this event. I'm very pleased to be here. Certainly, I think the GPST is a very important forum and precisely the size of global cooperation, etc. We need to accelerate learning and find the solutions we need. And so far, the consortium has identified some of the key challenges that we really need to address. And I think at Energinet we can associate ourselves very well with these challenges. So I think I will mention three. One, of course, is how to actually operate entirely what is it called, a fully inverter-based system without the balance and inertia from traditional power plants. I think that's a very, very important challenge for all of us. The second is to develop the tools and the metrics we need for analyzing and planning a 100% green energy system in uncertainty and unpredictability. I think that's also very important. A very, very important thing. And lastly, of course, developing the control room of the future, because our systems are becoming very, very complex. Time resolutions are becoming finer. We need to harvest the decentralized flexibility sources, etc., etc., etc. So running that is going to be a very, very complicated thing, and we need automation, we need artificial intelligence, etc. A second point would be to say, well, okay, you asked the question, how can we benefit from the GPST? But you could also turn it around and say, how can we all of us participating in this, how can we bring something to the table? We share similar type of challenges, but we also all have our specificities. So I would mention three things from a Danish context. One is large-scale offshore wind, which is a sort of a special focus area in Denmark. And you might know that the politicians have agreed on two huge energy islands that are going to be sort of hubs, offshore hubs with windmill parks around them. One of them is going to be really big, maybe a 10 gigawatt offshore island. So this is going to give us, first-hand experience of how to operate a synchronous area with fully inverter-based synchronous area. So I think there will be something interesting to bring to the table. One topic that we haven't talked so much about yet, but we might do so in the future, is hydrogen and PTX. We're sort of in a megawatt scale now, but we're going to have gigawatt installations coming onto us in the future. So how do we incorporate that? How do we sort of maximize the interaction between the electricity system and the hydrogen infrastructure to make best use of these facilities? I think that's a very important thing. And then the whole topic of digitalization, which is broader than just the control room challenge. Yeah. We also need digitally based market models to glue our various sectors together, unleash flexible demand, etc., etc., etc. So I think these are three very interesting areas for the future.
Thank you, Thomas, and also well done for dealing with our guests who are the flies, which have appeared yesterday. Yes. Last week we had Alan Jope here, the CEO of Unilever, who's a passionate Glaswegian, and he pointed out that the flies have normally gone by this time of the year, but this is evidence of global warming that the flies are still here. So I appreciate you coping with those movements. Very well done. Katie, coming to you. You sit also at a pivotal place, doing a lot of the analysis, a lot of the thinking, the thought leadership in this space. I'm interested in what you think, maybe your thoughts or your best tips around technology itself, and maybe also the collaboration topic, so well articulated. What's your thoughts from EPRI's stand?
Oh, sure. Thank you for the question. And when I think about what's happening here in Glasgow and around the world, there's very ambitious goals being set. I mentioned being inspired by those. So yes, ambitious goals to reduce greenhouse gases. And so what does that mean for EPRI and the partnership that we have? So, this is where the rubber's going to meet the road, so to speak. So we can be inspired, but now it's time to take action. And so what EPRI is thinking about is, what are the different ways to reduce carbon, the many pathways that are there, because there's no one-size-fits-all solution. We must be thinking about, in order to achieve global decarbonization, we must think about all of our resources, all of the tools, all of the collaborative innovation that's out there, and be able to bring these energy sectors together in order to come up with global solutions. So, and in that vein, we are also thinking about we think about carbon reduction in two different types of pathways. So one is the path to 2030, and the other is the path to 2050. Thomas, you had mentioned hydrogen, and that is in the longer term. But in order to achieve what we need to do today, we need to build on the viable technologies of today and accelerate and build on those. So some of those are energy efficiency, efficient electrification, cleaner generation. So in the U.S., they were able to, the power sector was able to make substantial progress in reducing its carbon reduction by more than 33% since the peak in 2007. So while that was an impressive record, we still have to move forward and bring the brightest minds together in order to come up with different solutions, put all options on the table, and also collaborate. So I was very proud to be a part of earlier in the week, where Louise was a part of this as well, the announcement on industrial clusters with the World Economic Forum. And so those industrial clusters are going to bring together both supply and demand so that they are co-located and can, per sector, reduce their carbon. And so that's an exciting collaboration to be a part of. We're looking at 100 of these industrial clusters by 2024. 4 of them have already been formed, and 2 of them, in fact, in the UK. So the bottom line is we really need to collaborate. We need all energy sectors together working on but multiple pathways towards a common goal of achieving net zero by 2050. So thank you.
I think Katie makes a really great point there about, there is no one silver bullet answer to net zero. We need to work on all of those solutions, because some will work in different geographies, some will work in different societies, and we just need to push forward on all of them. Right. Whether it's power to X, whether it's energy islands and offshore wind, whether it's hydrogen or whatever. Because I think we were going to need all of those technologies if we're going to tackle this challenge. Right. That's a really great point.
Which I guess then, Fintan, coming to yourself, the intent of GPST is to share, right? And it's incredible what it's achieved. What are you now thinking it needs to go to the next level, and where would you like to see it go?
Well, I suppose the ambition of GPST is to make a dramatic, or to effect a dramatic acceleration in the decarbonisation of power systems globally. And it was a collection of like-minded people who came together who really wanted to have an impact, and we're starting to see that happen. I think in order for it to go to the next level, we need to continue to scale it up, and we need to build out some of those partnerships and collaborations. We're starting to see some of the research funding come through in parts, but we need more of that, and we need to do it at scale. So I think it's about probably 2 things. It's about building partnerships and collaborations such that we can bring other people in and share the learnings, but also get that expertise in. And secondly, it is about funding as well, and sort of being able to step up to the next level some of that cutting-edge research and deployment that we need to do in order to make that dramatic acceleration.
And if you don't mind, just as we sort of go now to some open questions, I'm interested between you, Thomas, and you, Fintan. doing the day job's hard enough, right? I mean, I described this challenge of supply and demand variability. You're sitting above it all. You've got to do the day job. Prices are moving. How do you find the time to share and collaborate? How are you forcing that into your time to make a difference?
Well, I think you do when you realize that this is part of the solution. I don't think there are any system operators of the world that are able to solve all these problems on their own. And we know that. And things develop very, very rapidly. So getting together and sharing knowledge, pushing for R&D on some of these very, very tricky questions and challenges, this is part of the solution. So we basically have to find time, and so we do so. But I also think a very important part of this cooperation is when our experts, our technicians, etc., they get together and exchange knowledge, etc. It sort of accelerates the development, because we need many different solutions, and our circumstances are slightly different,
right,
but they are nevertheless relatively comparable enough for very good cooperation to take place.
I mean, I completely agree. I mean, I think this is the day job, right? I mean, I think that we look at our role as the electricity system operator. I mean, one, it is a role that sits at the heart of the energy industry, but also, because it's so pivotal, it places an obligation on us as the holders of that role to act and to try to solve these problems. So I think, addressing climate change, trying to push towards a more sustainable energy system is actually the day job. And we internally nearly break it down in sort of two ways. And we say, look, in the medium term, and Kelly, you talked about 2030 and 2050, we say, well, look, we need to work out what networks do we need. And Louise talked about some of the problems with delivering networks. So what networks do we need, and how can we get them delivered? How can we work with communities such that infrastructure can be deployed in a way? I mean, quite often this infrastructure comes into a community. They don't ask for it to be built, and it's for the benefit of the country as a whole, but it impacts on the individual community. So what infrastructure do we need? How do we get it delivered? What set of resources do we need? There's no one answer, but what is the combination of wind, solar, storage, hydrogen, CCUS, nuclear, that we need or that is appropriate in a particular geography, and how do you make that work together? And then what sort of market arrangements do you need in order to enable players to come forward and build that infrastructure and deliver it, and deliver, Cesar talked about ancillary services. How do you make sure that the providers of those systems are rewarded? So in solving those long-term problems, at the same time as keeping the lights on, transitioning that system such that it can manage it, and in the UK we have that ambition to be able to operate the system at zero carbon by 2025. Some of it is helped by deploying technologies such as Marks, but that's a huge transformation, and it needs that digitalisation that Thomas talked about, that completely revolutionising. Like how does a control engineer, an engineer in the control room, think about how to manage that, and what do you need to support them? And then at the end of the day, as with all these things, it comes down to people as well. We need to think about what is the workforce that we need for the future, and what's the culture that needs to exist within the organisation, because the culture that was there in the past, was potentially perceived as slightly ivory tower, sort of removed, very conservative, very risk averse, which is absolutely appropriate. But as you try to transition something to something completely different, you need to work out, well, how do you bring innovation into that? But it's not innovation and risk everywhere. It's innovation and risk in the right places at the right time that allow you to still maintain the levels of security supply that are needed in order to keep, society and the economy ticking over. So it's that balancing act all the time.
And that, as you said, it's called GPST. For everyone, the T is transformation. You're very clear that the industry's mission is transformation. And just one interesting thing that I saw the other week, it was in the Financial Times, it was showing that the wind has started to fall away a little bit in the power generation. How do you plan with nature being a key determinant of the success of the wind farm. How do you put that into your models and think about it, Thomas? Because you, as you mentioned, have got 2 huge hubs. So how do you cope with that variability?
Carefully.
Yes, exactly. Well, I mean, nature is nature. Yeah. So I guess our job is to basically ask ourselves, what sort of energy systems do we need to reap the benefits of these fluctuating energy resources from wind and solar that we are going to base ourselves on in the future, because that's the way we're going. So we have to find these solutions. We have to be able to store energy. We have to integrate across countries, as was mentioned. We're already very integrated with our neighboring countries at Energinet. We're very pleased with that, but we're also moving into, let's say, the second half of the green transition. So we need more solutions than just integrating with neighboring countries. But I do also think that we are going to see, energy prices, electricity prices fluctuating quite a lot in the future. And maybe this is also part of the market signals that need to be sent to actually underpin the development of some of these new technologies that will themselves be part of the solution to cope with energy systems that have such huge amounts of fluctuating energy. But we're going to need a lot of it, really a lot. So I think that's the first best solution, is to basically build out with as much renewable as you can and as you can cope with in your system.
Right. I think Thomas makes a great point there around, electricity prices will potentially fluctuate a lot more. But the other thing that hopefully that will drive to some extent, and that will then matter, is we need more participation by the demand side. I mean, to date, our electricity industry is typified by pretty inelastic demand curve with supply flexing to meet that. But as we go forward, we need to think about, well, how will the demand side better engage in it? How will they view flexibility? And we need to do that while not unduly impacting on the utility or the value that people get from electricity supply. So how do we get consumers to engage in a way that works for them? Right. And I think that's a new way of thinking that will take some time, and we need to keep pushing that.
Well, it's interesting if you went to the consumer. That was going to be my next question. We did a survey which was published with the UN on Monday, and it showed that still the vast majority of CEOs see the consumer or the customer as the biggest influencer on their green transition, second, employees, and thirdly, the financial institutions. So I'm interested, as all key players, right, what can consumers do to help, right? And maybe also what do businesses need to do to help you make this a success?
Well, I think, as Vincent said, that we need a lot more flexibility on the consumer side. We probably need to participate in the development of business models, bringing data to the table and all kinds of things we can do, developing our markets for system products to unleash this flexibility. But I think we need consumers to be much more flexible. And then, in terms of what can the industry do, etc., I think this is basically what we're trying to achieve with the GPST. We identify the challenges that we face. Some of them are sometimes a little bit hidden below the radar, but we sort of bring the light to these challenges, and then we hope that academia, the industry, etc., will sort of help us solve these problems, because we need to solve them. Otherwise, we won't succeed.
Yeah.
So,
my hypothesis on consumer engagement is that it will ultimately be cracked by someone probably outside of the energy industry who develops a really cool app that people actually engage with.
Right.
Because at the moment, a lot of the schemes are kind of niche. And depend on a level of engagement that probably isn't sustainable. But Alexa or Siri can certainly manage things in the background, and I think someone will crack an app that will take care of your charging your EV and some of the other stuff in the house without you thinking about it, knowing about it, and that will I think flip some of the stuff. And Thomas mentioned as well about being more transparent about data and stuff like that. I do think that is one of the things that will unleash innovation, is greater access and transparency around data. And Daniel talked about the digital twin that he's running in AMO. We launched on Friday a project for the UK called our Virtual Energy System, where we're going to develop a complete virtualization and digital twin of the energy system in the UK, soup to nuts. And part of that is to allow people to test new business models, right? So you'll be able to engage with it, test new business models with real data and that as well. So, it's one of those things, building on all of these applications will hopefully come forward as a result of that.
And we've seen big applications of digital twin and technology. Katie, coming back to you in the research, what's the most exciting thing you're seeing? If you were to name one thing, what do you think could be the most exciting thing you're seeing which could make a big difference to what we're talking about here?
Well, if I could say three most exciting things that I see. Being a researcher, when I look to 2050, things that we have to start today, it's really looking at the low-carbon resources such as hydrogen or ammonia that are out there, but looking at that, and then carbon capture and storage, that's critically important because there's going to be hard to electrify areas. And then, that was two.
We ended up with two in the end, so that's fine. It's certainly more than my one. I'm going to come back to Louise here just before we wrap. In a similar vein, Louise, we've got some people at the forefront of stuff here, but who do you think's cracking this challenge that we should be looking at as the exemplar of this transition?
So I'm not going to name any company in particular, but I did reflect as the others were speaking that the electricity sector is interesting because the companies like the system operators are taking responsibility for the challenge to get to net zero themselves. And you don't see that across the broader energy system. You see a lot of narrative about, okay, the consumer is responsible for getting us to net zero. But actually, I love what the two DSOs were saying because they're right. Like an app will solve it. It will automate the whole situation for demand flexibility. Not only will demand follow supply, but supply will follow demand. You'll see both happening. And that won't be because, 1 or 2 or 100,000 consumers make a change to the way they do things. It will be because, as Fenton mentioned, somebody will develop some really neat digital technology which will automate all of it. And your electric vehicle, your heat pump, all of that will be controlled through an app, which will allow the system operators the flexibility that they need to move in the direction of net zero. So yeah, I don't think it's happened yet. I think it will happen. And again, I like that the electricity system stakeholders are taking their responsibility for that and saying that they have the skills, the TSOs and the DSOs have the skills to get their systems to net zero, and they're going to move in that direction. And, those apps that will come will mean that the consumer will not, my mother won't be thinking about, how do I control my electricity in the middle of the night or in the middle of the day, but an app will automate that and an app will make that happen.
I think there will be people now at both Amazon and Google desperately thinking about how they engineer an app to basically manage the future market. But you could see that pain point will be fundamental and the switching will be very interesting. So just before we wrap up, fast forward to the next COP. What sort of percentage of the world's energy is going to be renewably generated? Who wants to go first on a guesstimate?
I don't have an estimate for you, but I think trying to measure that in COP to COP is probably difficult because, these are huge infrastructure projects, right? So what you need is mobilization over a decade, not a...
So how about by 2030 then?
So by 2030, I think it'll differ around the world. I think, places like the UK will have made a dramatic acceleration. People at places like Denmark will have made a dramatic acceleration. I think largely due to what I would hope would be, for those technologies that are sort of commercial today, offshore wind, etc., you'll see them rolled out at even greater scale. And I think for those that are starting to emerge, CCUS and hydrogen, by 2030 we should have commercial plants operating maybe in 1 or 2 of those industrial clusters, but with a clear plan then about how you roll them out. I think the UK's experience with offshore wind really shows that where you invest early and put the right set of sort of supports around it, you can drive that cost curve down really, really quickly. Yeah. And I suppose by 2030, what you hope to see is that, you know, as I say, those mature technologies rolled out and those that, you know, we absolutely need in order to make a difference, starting to see commercial applications of them at scale.
I wouldn't guess about the world either,
right.
but I do think that by 2030 we will see considerable parts of the world, parts of Europe, etc., where we are, you know, pretty close to a 100% green electricity system. If you look at the whole Nordic area, it's more or less bound to move to that by 2030. So we are already at Energinet at 50% fluctuating renewables in our system. So and this is also why I think we have this obligation to basically, you know, share our knowledge, whatever we learned, what our experience, etc., to sort of accelerate the global development. And after all, our vision at Energinet is green energy for a better world. That might sound a bit high-flying for a TSO, but as was said before, we are definitely trying to take the responsibility to contribute actually to the ultimate goal of being able to run a system that is 100% green, it's secure, and it's also affordable. That's our aim. The energy trilemma, how can we master that?
And if I would just add, it's also, I'd say, very hard, I think, to estimate the percent renewable, because it's going to depend. I think that's why we talk a lot about pathways and the fact that, you know, what about the one I'm most excited about that I failed to mention was like advanced nuclear. So where is that going to fall into the equation? There's more momentum behind it. Are there going to be more innovations? Will that be a bigger part of the picture? That will affect the percent of renewables. Will hydro still be considered? There's some parts of the world that don't consider hydro to be renewable. So it will be interesting to see, again, I think, because it's going to depend on your local resources and the types of markets and what you have in your end uses where the percent of renewables will end up.
Well, thank you very much to the panel here, and I'll come round everybody just after a quick wrap-up. It's been very clear, the challenge set out in the last week or so, it really brings it straight to the top of mind. And one thing's for sure, without the initiative of GPST, there'd be less chance. I'd like to, reiterate again how impressed we are as a company with the intent of GPST. It was highlighted by Louise that this is an exemplar of businesses coming together to collaborate and share technology and data and IP, thought process. The framework that Daniel discussed is leading. It's leading this industry, but it's also leading across industries. When I look across, that level of intent of collaboration is actually unheard of elsewhere. And at one level, it's okay for you to do because of the competitive nature is easier, but at another level, it would be easy to sit back and do your own stuff and not share. So it's admirable in its intent, and it's clear also it's showing benefits. It's also clear that the complexity of what this sector has to take on, the variability of the new supply, the need for it to be secure, and the need for it to be affordable, sensitivity with the winter season. Now, the number of articles in the UK is quite incredible around this topic. So fair play to you all for taking on that challenge. You probably didn't think it was going to fall to you at 18 or 19, all of you, but I'm glad you're taking it on. And then at the heart of it, something that we believe is the case is that technology and human ingenuity is going to be vital in the solution. Whether it was Mark and reactive technologies, a couple of mentions of digital twins, which if ever there was a sector appropriate for the benefits of understanding a digital twin, it has to be the challenge that GPST and all that around it take on. So we as Accenture, we wish you well on this journey. We're happy to be playing our part and continue to do so. So with that, I wanted to thank Cesar, who joined us from Peru, Louise, who joined us last week physically and this week remotely. Thank you, Louise, for joining us. Thomas, Katie, and Fintan here on the panel. Thank you very much for your considered thoughts and everything you're doing. And with that, we'll close this session on GPST. Thank you to everyone joining here, and thank you to everyone who's listening remotely and enjoying the story. Let's all do our bit. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.